this is Antoine with another episode of Out and Up, where we encourage young athletes to achieve their very best outside of the game. And like every show, we're blessed to have another awesome guest. And y'all know how I do. I'm going to go ahead and let him introduce himself.
Thanks for having me, brother. My name is Stanley Jackson. I'm the head football coach at Westerville North High School, a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio.
Thank you, Coach Jackson. You ready to get into the questions?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right. Coach Jackson, where you originally from, born and raised?
The great Paterson, New Jersey.
That's
a very unique community where I've been all over the country, been out of the country. There's nothing like Paterson, New Jersey.
That's good. And everybody that has watched this show and know me know that it is also my home. So it is an honor to have Coach Jackson on with me. We're a few years apart. Most people know I played at Eastside High School, but a few years apart. But for my time in Paterson, he was definitely one of the most decorated quarterbacks to come through the area. And so it's always a good feeling to have someone that I was blessed to kind of witness their greatness back home. And so thank you again, Coach Jackson, for joining us. And we're going to go ahead and get into the questions. So from Paterson, New Jersey, what high school did you play at back in Paterson?
So I started my career at Paterson Kennedy, and on a very undefeated team coached by Lou Mathis. A lot of us back in Paterson have had a time or two with Coach Lou Mathis, one of the greatest coaches to ever coach there. He also played at Ohio State. And then Coach Lou had the opportunity to become a head coach. So he moved on to Paterson Catholic. And my father thought it was best that I go with him. And I feel like we really reestablished Paterson Catholic as a dominant sports school. The academics were always pretty good, but after going there, we really became a powerhouse in football. Ultimately won several state championships. The basketball team led by Tim Thomas and Jimmy Salomon. Right. So I finished my last 3 years at Paterson Catholic.
That's awesome. And again, much greatness has definitely come out of Paterson Catholic. During my time, again, they end up going on to be coached by my freshman high school year coach. Benji Wimberly was my freshman coach at Eastside High School. And then he went on to Paterson Catholic, and they continued their dominance even while I was back home. And so, yes, Paterson Catholic definitely carried a rich history in football, in that time that I was there. And so, yes, I know a lot about those times. You just mentioned your father real quick, feeling like it was best for you to make that transition. I also know of your father because we had an awesome little league program in Paterson, Penfield, back in the day. And your father was a coach during that time. And so where did sports start for you when it came to sports, whether it was football or any other sports? At what point did you start getting involved in sports?
So, I always feel like I was one of the lucky ones, because I had two people in my life that I've always modeled my life after. Obviously, my father was first, and then my older brother. So my dad was my first coach, and it was in baseball. Paterson used to have a very dynamic baseball league where if you look at, the history of baseball in Paterson, a lot of kids played, and that was their first sport. So I started with baseball, and then obviously migrated into basketball and football eventually. And believe it or not, Lou Mathis is the one that started that football league. And in the heyday, Penfield was fantastic. I mean, it was all the kids that in our era that went on to play Division I college football and even some in the NFL all had their start in that league. So for me, it started with baseball. My father would say it's the greatest sport there is. It's still the hardest thing to do in the world is to hit a baseball.
Yeah.
From there, we had an opportunity to play every sport, the big three, as I call them, right? Baseball, basketball, and football. And so it was a lot different back then, though. We didn't have to pay the fees that kids have to pay now in order to play youth sports. It was provided by the community. And the league was pretty fascinating in football because you had all these different sponsors, and that's how you knew the teams, right? I played for the Alpha Steelers. That was sponsored by the fraternity. You had Bottom Line. That was sponsored by Marty Barnes, a former mayor there in Paterson, New Jersey. Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yes.
A lot of great names that we remember that bring up a lot of good memories.
Yeah, definitely remember those days. And so I asked, and it's funny, I'm gonna step back for a second. You talked about baseball and being hard to hit a ball. I recognized that very early. I was blessed to play 2 years for Task Force, playing for Coach Green, aka Twig. Many people know Coach Twig. And so I had an honor of playing 2 years. For 2 years at Pee Wee, I recognized I had a problem with making connection with that ball. So that's when I recognized baseball was not for me. But as you went on in the Patterson Catholic, what were some of your most memorable moments in your years, those years at Patterson Catholic and playing football?
Well, there's quite a few. Like I said, at the time, Patterson Catholic was sort of the laughing stock in local sports when it came to high school sports. And so one of my fondest memories was being able to establish Patterson Catholic as a landing spot for great athletes. And we built some really good teams. I mean, back then the rules were a lot different. The point system was a lot different, but we never lost more than 2 games any of the years that I was at Patterson Catholic and never made the playoffs.
Wow.
After they expanded the playoffs a little bit, changed it up, and the school was able to go on and win several state championships in football. It was always very competitive in basketball. And so to me, just being a part of that and establishing that great legacy is a big deal and is a great memory. I'm still saddened by the fact that they've closed down. The diocese decided to close down Patterson Catholic, and a lot of the great athletes are now going to the other Catholic schools around that are doing real good things. And so I'll always be excited about that and proud of that legacy of being a part of the start of something special.
That's good. That's good. So at Patterson Catholic, when was it that you recognized that you were going to have an opportunity to continue your career on the next level?
That's a great question. I mean, I was obviously always knew I wanted to play in college football. My brother at the time, who played at Patterson Kennedy, with some great football teams, they won a state championship in 1988. Or actually 1987, and would have repeated in 1988 had my brother not tore his ACL. And so he went on to play at Bethune-Cookman, Division I HBCU, and he was kind of the model, right? So I always modeled myself after him, and it was great for me because we played the same position. And as he went on to college and really learned more about the quarterback position, he was able to pour into me. So, after my sophomore year, after transferring to Patterson Catholic, then sitting out 2 games, and then going on a great run, we were 8-1, I believe, that year. I can't remember whether we played 8 or 10 games back then. It seems so long ago, back in the 1900s. But I knew early on that I'd have an opportunity because, I started getting letters and we started getting recruited. And it was a lot different then than it is now. I have to give a lot of credit to Coach Lou Mathis, who was really instrumental in making sure that he got that information out there about the athletes that he had on his team. And like I said earlier, Coach Lou also played at Ohio State.
Right. Yeah.
Or that they were aware of me. And then once those letters started coming in and it started with Ohio State, it really opened up a floodgate. So it was after my sophomore season that I knew I'd have an opportunity to play college football. I just didn't know where.
Got you. So during that process, like you said, I'm sure it was a lot different back then compared to now. But during that process, first, what were some other schools that you may have been considering at the time?
Well, at the time I was an All-American. I was the 3rd ranked quarterback coming out in 1993. And so really I had a chance to go anywhere I wanted, with the 2 exceptions of Notre Dame and Florida State, because the number 1 and number 2 quarterbacks were going there. A name a lot of people, college football fans might remember, Ron Paulus. When he came out of high school, people said he would be the greatest ever. He'd win 4 Heisman, stuff like that. So it was a good class. So yeah, I had a chance. I could have went almost anywhere in the country. I still kick myself, quite frankly, for not taking 2 visits. I should have visited USC to get out to Southern California. I should have got on a plane and went to Hawaii. But yeah, Syracuse was up there at the top of my list. So was North Carolina. But it was several Big Ten schools that I visited, and it was a lot different then. Now you have unlimited visits. Now kids are going to camps all across the country with social media, and how we're talking here, is we're 8 hours away from each other or further. You can get connected to universities more. Back then it was pretty difficult. So you tended to stay with schools closer to you geographically to make it easier for your family to go see you wherever you decided to play. But so I had a unique opportunity to see a lot of places. But once I visited Ohio State and had an opportunity to stand in the middle of the horseshoe, it was a done deal for me.
All right. So as the coach, what are some things you tell your young players when making a decision to go to school? What are some things they should look at?
Well, the first decision that I say is the most vital is make sure that wherever you decide to go to school, you can live there. There are a number of stories of great high school athletes from our hometown in Paterson, New Jersey, that selected schools and communities that they weren't comfortable in. And because of that, they were distracted, they were depressed, and they ended up back in Paterson. And I really believe if they had picked communities that they were okay living in, bigger cities, that they would have been able to thrive in those areas. And so I tell kids all the time, you have to live there. Make sure it's a place you want to live. Secondly, make sure it has a major that you want. And I steer my kids away from all easy majors, to be honest with you. Don't go and waste 4 years getting a major that you can't get a job to take care of your family. Make sure that if you're going to college, you're picking something that you know for sure you can take care of your family. Because I'm also a big believer in that you don't have to go to college to take care of your family. So if you do it and spend that kind of money, time, effort, and energy, make sure that the major makes sense for you long term. And then lastly, don't pick it because of a head coach, because they leave all the time. Right. Make sure that the position coach and the strength coach, that you're on the same page with those two guys, because you're going to spend the most time with them. You don't see your head coach that often, but your position coach makes the determination of who plays in the room that you're in. And then your strength coach really has to sign off on you, and he's the one that's going to help you get bigger, stronger, faster. So those are the three top things I tell my kids whenever they're picking a college.
All right. All right. So as you entered into your career at Ohio State, was it an easy transition for you coming from the Paterson, New Jersey, moving on to Ohio State? What was the transition like for you?
It was difficult, but it was easier than expected. And again, I didn't get the advice that I just gave. My brother had went to Bethune-Cookman, but it was happenstance because he tore his knee his senior year. And then his recruiting sort of fell off. So he ended up at Bethune-Cookman because the reality is he was better than me as a quarterback. I was a little bigger, maybe a little more athletic, but he was a more polished quarterback with a better arm, more accurate. And back then, when you tore your ACL, though, it was almost like a death penalty, right? And so he didn't have a lot of choices. So he just happened to go to Bethune-Cookman. So we really didn't look at the school the way I would have kids look at it now. I didn't spend a lot of time with the strength coach or the position coach. Actually, I really didn't know the position coach that well, because the wide receiver coach is the guy that recruited me. I didn't know a lot about Columbus, Ohio. I didn't know about the offense that Ohio State ran. And so in taking my visit, I was pleasantly surprised that Columbus, Ohio wasn't a cow town. Because honestly, growing up in Jersey on the East Coast, I thought cows were going to be walking in the street in Ohio. A farming community, and I'd run into green pastures of wheat, corn. But that's kind of how it is when you go to Happy Valley or when you go to Notre Dame. They're in the middle of nowhere. Columbus is a thriving metropolis. It's the 14th largest city in the country right now, and it's growing faster and faster. And so I was able to make a transition easy because of that. But also, as you know, growing up in Paterson, you don't have a lot of interaction with white people unless they're in a position of authority. And so that was a challenge for me. For the first time, when I first saw the football team for the first time, I didn't think we were very good. And I remember saying this to my roommate, who's Sean Springs, who's the third pick of the draft. And in 1996, I remember saying to him, we must not be very good because we got too many white guys. Right? Many white guys on our team, maybe one or two. I had Joe Gorga, who was an Italian that played on our freshman team at Kennedy that went undefeated, but that was about it. And then I went out to practice, and I remember the very first time a white kid ran past me. I couldn't believe it. It was a guy by the name of Rob Kelly, a second-round draft pick. He was 6'2", free safety at Ohio State, and he was fast. And we're running. This kid runs by me, and I said, "Well, that's not supposed to happen."
Right.
And right there, I said, I've got to reassess my thought process about and whether race is a big factor. And at the end of the day, you learn that it doesn't matter in football. The guy that's in the trench with you, if he's fighting as hard as you, you're good with that. And that white athletes can run and jump, and they will hit you in the mouth just like we will. So I had a learning curve, but it didn't take too long to sort of figure that out, because you realize that everybody was there for the same thing. They wanted to be the very best they could, and they wanted to take it to the next level, and they were willing to work to do that. And the other thing that was surprising, which I really didn't expect, was that every athlete was as good or better than me. Wow. In high school, and I think about some guys. I think about the Collins twins, with Sheldon Prescott. Guys like played Jason Perry that played at Paterson Catholic, James Scott. I mean, there was a handful of athletes that I felt like I was in the category with them. But when you got to Ohio State, everybody was like that. Everybody was special. Everybody was the man in their high school. There
Right.
was a kid by Tommy Willis who unfortunately academically didn't make it at Ohio State, but he was from Georgia and he was Mr. Georgia for basketball and football. So you can
Wow.
only imagine the type of athlete this guy was. He's
Wow.
about explosive, could run, jump, and the team was just loaded. And that was the first time I was ever on a full team of guys that were as good or better than me athletically, and that was something that I had to figure out.
Wow. Wow. So I know that you experienced some success at Ohio State. I definitely go back to, I think it was 96 season, 97 Rose Bowl that you experienced the victory in the big bowl game there. But what were some of your most memorable moments at Ohio State as a
Well,
Buckeye?
some good and some bad. There was a lot of things that I had to learn
Right.
about the quarterback position that I didn't know. I was just an athlete when I got to Ohio State, run around. I had a big arm. I was accurate, but I didn't understand the game of football. And this is where Patterson betrayed me, quite frankly. I remember thinking Patterson was the center of the universe.
Right.
Yeah, it was a big town. When you grow up there, that's what you think. Not realizing that Patterson is one of the smallest, cities in America, let alone the state of New Jersey. Now it's densely populated, but
Right.
it's still a very small community. And I quickly learned that it wasn't the center of the universe. But some of the things that we're taught in Patterson really didn't hold well for me. Because you grew up there, and it's either fight or flight, right? Either you're going to
Correct.
run, or fighter, and most of our mothers didn't allow us to be runners.
Right.
We fighters. And so I remember fighting battles early on at Ohio State that I really shouldn't have fought with coaches. Instead of really diving in and learning more about football, my thing was just give me the ball, let me play. I don't need all that stuff, right? Because that's what I did my whole career. And that set me back, quite frankly. And it wasn't until a year that I realized if I don't make some changes, I'm not going to play. And I couldn't let that happen. There was too much riding on it, too many people that were counting on me. And in that one year, I made significant changes. I started watching film like never before. I got a better understanding of the offense and what we were trying to accomplish out there. And once I did that, my athleticism, took over. The problem that I ran into is that I had 3 years of not building goodwill. And I didn't build trust in the coaching staff. And so instead of just giving me the reins of the team and letting it be mine, they wanted to split time with other guys.
Right.
With a few different guys. It first was supposed to be Tom Hoying, and then I beat him out. Then Mark Garcia was the top JUCO college quarterback coming in '96. He tore his meniscus, and then next thing you know, I'm splitting time with Joe Germain. So it really wasn't about the other guys. It was just that they didn't trust me. And so
Right.
lessons that we learn sometimes in our communities that we need to survive in those communities don't necessarily translate to other places. So I had to learn that, right? And that's a life lesson that was very difficult. It was a hard pill to swallow, but it's something now that I'm able to share with my kids and the kids that I coach, so that they don't experience that. And so I look back at that as a fond memory because it was a hard lesson, but things that I've learned have allowed me to teach my kids better. But other than that, playing at Ohio State is pretty special. I mean, there's 100,000 fans when I played. It's bigger now. It is a rabid fan base. I'm still a celebrity in this community, which is crazy, to be honest with you. And so those memories are great. The teammates, the locker room. I play with a guy that wears a gold jacket now in Orlando Pace.
Wow.
And can say those things. And so I can still go back to Ohio State whenever I want and go to games. So it's a good feeling to be a part of that particular fraternity. Winning the Rose Bowl was sensational. We also played at Ohio State. We played the very first Eddie Robinson Classic.
Okay.
Still alive, and he came back to the Horseshoe. Was able to meet him. So that was pretty cool too. And it's just a lot of great experiences. But at the end of the day, as you know, when you play for a team on a football team is different than anything else, because any other sport can be dominated by one person.
Right.
If soccer, you got a dominant goalie, you're going to be in every game. If it's baseball and nobody can hit your pitcher, you're going to be in every game, right? If it's basketball and you got a LeBron James, he can go from Cleveland to Miami to LA, and they could be the worst team, but automatically they're a contender. Football, you don't get that. I don't care how good you are. It takes 11 guys doing the same thing at the same time to have real success in football. You can be a great quarterback, but if your line isn't any good, you don't get any time to throw it, doesn't matter. You can be a great wide receiver. If your quarterback stinks, you're not getting the ball. So football is very unique in that way. And because of it, I think the relationships that are built in the game of football are a little stronger and last longer than other sports, quite frankly.
Okay. All right. So I asked, as you completed your career there, what were your goals as you entered into your last year at Ohio State? What were your plans and your thoughts going forward?
Well, it was a couple of things that was happening at the time. Number one, I wanted to play in the NFL like everybody else. That was
Right.
always and probably sometimes it was too big a part of what I wanted to do. Because I wasn't able to focus on some other things and prepare myself better for life after football. And again, I got a lot of friends that were first round draft picks. I played with two number one overall draft picks at Ohio State, Big Daddy Dan Wilkinson and Orlando Place. My roommate, Sean Springs, was the third pick of the draft. Terry Glenn was the sixth pick of the draft. Joey Galloway, Eddie George. I mean, the list goes on with guys that I played with that were top 10 picks. All those guys are doing something now after football. So I wasn't ready for that. I had all my eggs in one basket, and I just wanted to play in the NFL. But when I realized that that might not be as easy as I thought, then I started to do things differently. I started to focus more academically, and tried to figure out what I wanted to do after football. But in reality, I wanted to play in the NFL. When that didn't happen, I went and played 7 years in Canada. And so I tried to figure out what it was I wanted to do in life. So now with my kids, I teach them a lot different. I tell them, you got to know what you want to do. You got to be focused. If we're going to go to college, then we need to know what we want to do. We want to be a professional in something. So let's pick a major now. And so like my oldest son, who will be a preferred walk-on at Toledo, he's going to study law and
That's
business,
good.
right? So he's prepared there. But yeah, I wanted to play in the league, and going into my senior year, that was it. That was the plan, to get to the NFL. Unfortunately, I had a knee injury that sort of sidelined that my senior year. So even though I didn't miss a game, I really wasn't myself. After the first 3 games, I was lighting it up. Had I not got hurt, I probably would have been drafted late in that draft the next year. But I look back at that, and sometimes that all is for the best, quite frankly. I'm not sure I'd be sitting here today in the position I am had I went to the NFL, because I would probably been a little distracted. But I met my wife in college. We've been together ever since. We've been married for it'll be 25 years in May. We got 4 wonderful kids, 3 boys and a girl, and sometimes that's not always possible when you play at the highest level, right? Quite frankly, because there are a lot of distractions, and so,
Right.
so I wouldn't rewrite the story, so to speak. But I wasn't as focused in other areas as I should have been. The plan was to get to the NFL or bust, and that's probably not the best course of action when you have an opportunity to play at the highest level.
Right. But you were able to extend your career, like you said, even moving on to play in Canada. What was that experience like, being able to play professionally over there?
Oh, it was fantastic. It was a fun brand of football. We got to experience a different country and different cultures. Our first 3 years was in Montreal. At the time, Montreal's in Quebec, and they wanted to succeed from Canada. They want to be a French country, so that was fascinating to live there. And then we went on to Toronto. That's like a big city in America. I always call them our kissing cousin. Like, they love Americans, but they hate them in a way. And then we were able to go out west in Canada and spend our last 3 years in Winnipeg, which is fascinating too. So, I remember the first time I drove to Winnipeg, it was in July because camp was getting started. There was still snow on the ground. So that's the type of that's where you go in that part of the country. So the experience was great. We made decent money, not great, but we were young, my wife and I. We got to enjoy that part of life and do something that most people don't get to do. The funny thing about that, I remember coming back. I would come back in the off seasons to the United States and be here in Columbus, Ohio, training. The kids say, "Well, when are you gonna go pro?" And I've been pro for 5 years. I get paid in Canada, but nobody was aware of it. But no, it was a fun time. It really was, and it's really just another opportunity to sort of build yourself and learn about other people and other cultures, and realize that life really is a bunch of experiences.
Right.
Those experiences carve out who we are. And I think sometimes for kids in communities that grow up like ours, they just need to get out of that community sometimes. I mean, I go back now to Patterson, and there are people that have been there their whole lives outside of taking brief vacations, and I think it definitely warps your development, right? When you don't realize that there are other ways of life.
Right.
Some of that is better than what you're used to.
Right. And I totally agree with you. I think one of my biggest dreams, I've told people so often, one day I want to see the day that I'm able to connect the programs here with the programs back home in Jersey. I just think even living here in Fayetteville, we don't have programs that get to travel outside of the state and play schools in other states, because I think so many of our kids from neighborhoods like ours need to experience, like you said. I had a bunch of buddies when I moved south. They right away was like, man, I'm not coming down. And, because like you had your view of Ohio,
Right.
they have their view of the South. Like there's no life outside of Patterson. And like you said, yourself, you went from playing ball in Ohio to staying there because you saw better life for you and your family and everything. Same here. I made a decision after being out of school, to leave Jersey and then move to North Carolina. And I think it's so important that we start to find ways that we build programs and our inner city programs, whether it's the East Side, the Kennedys, that they're able to in some way be able to play outside of their walls, so that it's not when they go to school that they find out there is life outside. Because again, then you go into the culture shock because you see areas that you've never been privy to before.
Right.
And so I would love to see that happen. I think it's so important that our kids get to see that there is life outside of Jersey. And I think it will help many of them in making those decisions when it's time to decide to move on and continue their careers when they have the opportunities.
Now, that before, by the way, Coach Salmon, who's still in Patterson, still,
Yes.
AAU level, really understood that, quite frankly. And he was young when he
Yes.
he wasn't a lot older than me at the time. And I didn't know that because I was a kid. But, number one, his team was loaded. Tim
Yes.
Thomas and everybody followed. And then all of a sudden he's got Tim Thomas, Donald Hand, Kevin Freeman, all on the same team with other guys that can flat out play basketball. And he took that team on the road. I mean, they were going down to Florida, playing on ESPN. And it would have been my sophomore season, or maybe even my junior year, because it would have been Tim's senior year, where they actually came to Columbus, Ohio, and played in a tournament. And they mopped some, and it was phenomenal for me because I was able to talk smack to all my Ohio guys when they came in. So he was doing that back then. He was taking those kids, putting them on buses, putting them on planes, and letting them go to other communities and play. Now, sometimes the logistics of football gets a little tough because you got a lot more kids and the expense is greater. But yeah, that's something that you can do. Kirk Herbstreit, who I was a big quarterback at Ohio State and big time ESPN personality, actually had a Kirk Herbstreit Classic at one point, and they would invite teams from all over the country to come into the Horseshoe and play Ohio schools.
Wow.
And one of the Jersey schools did do that at one point.
Okay.
So yeah, there's unique opportunities to do that. Now there are a lot of things that have to change in Patterson before that happens. And I think, right now from a sports perspective, we are struggling a little bit. Patterson Eastside has been better the last couple of years. I mean, Kennedy's gone a long time without winning any football games.
Yes.
So the dynamic has changed. I mean, because when we were kids, I'm thrilled that, I know they probably overpaid to get the stadium refurbished, but there is something to that. Hopefully it's going to be used properly, because I remember on them bleachers, hearing my dad say, "Don't be moving, you're behind on them bleachers because that fiberglass is gonna get
that fiberglass would tear you up. It would tear you up. You'd be itching the whole game."
The whole game. And but sitting there in the freezing cold, watching Eastside and Kennedy play back in 1987 and 1988, watching Kennedy go through a state championship run. I mean, that was special. That's why I wanted to play football in that stadium on that raggedy turf that they had back then, right?
Yes.
And so reestablishing that, I think, is important because, you can capture, something special in young people again. There's something to playing in a space that's special. Right. I learned that early on. So my wife is from Massillon, Ohio. Not sure if you're familiar with that, but the Brown family is from Massillon, Ohio. Paul Brown, who
Okay.
was starting the NFL, was the guy who started the Cleveland Browns and then ultimately moved the team to Baltimore. Well, their high school stadium seats 20,000 people.
Wow.
And every Friday night it's packed, jam packed.
Wow.
Not a seat in the house. When I met my wife, the reason why I can, she decided to, give me a shot was because her grandmother fell in love with me. And her grandmother, she loved football.
Right.
And this town loves football. It's not the greatest town. It's actually dying from an economic standpoint, because Ohio doesn't have steel industry like it used to, or the rubber industry, and they were right in the heart of that. And but it's still, they won a state championship last year. It's a really good football community. So when you have a stadium like now they've reestablished in Patterson, if done right, you can establish this again. The Thanksgiving game was packed every year.
Right.
It's not the case anymore.
No, not at all.
Back home, we've got to reestablish some things. Now, I think I'm part of the problem too, right? I'm supposed to go home. I'm a product of the community. I'm supposed to go back and try to give back. But, at the same time, my wife's from Ohio, and I had to make the decision that was best for my family, quite frankly.
Right.
And sometimes in youth, Patterson is losing talent to other communities. We got to figure out a way of how to get that talent back. Now, part of that is the community has to get better.
Right.
There's a dying community, right? Poverty is rampant more now than ever. Crime is worse more now than ever. And people got to start figuring some things out, because the reality is we've got a lot of talent spread out all across the country. You could bring all that talent back. If it was willing to come back to that community, you would see a significant change in Patterson.
Right. You're definitely hitting some big points. I think definitely with a city like Patterson, we have to focus more on the needs of our young people outside of the sport, because it's, to bring a kid in and utilize his skill in the sport, but we're not taking care of the whether it's the mental health needs, whether it's, helping them and assisting them in their personal issues that's going on in their personal lives. I think sometimes we tend to lose them. You mentioned Eastside, and so the blessing, and like you say, I've seen them turn around over the last couple of years. James Magazine was my quarterback my senior year. So, it's awesome to see the things that he's doing. I know personally that he's somebody that truly care about those young men. And I think that's what we need in Patterson, coaches that truly care about these guys, even outside of the sports, because I think that's a big part of getting the kids to be disciplined and really focusing not just on what they need to do on the field, but also in life, at the same time.
Well, what I learned early on. So, especially as a father, I've kind of learned this early on as a dad, that you've got to find motivation. Great story. My youngest son would probably hate this story, but send my boys back to Patterson for at least 30 days every summer. My wife didn't necessarily like that back then, but she understood why, because we had the conversation. I needed them to get a little bit of grit. We're living in the suburbs of Ohio. I needed some city grit in them, right? So I would send them back. And my youngest at the time, just for some reason, didn't want to learn how to read. Now, because my oldest two boys were great academically, they're stellar. And my youngest at the time, it was time for him to start learning reading, but he was just being lazy. And so he gets back to my brother's house in Patterson, and they're picking movies. This is when we still using DVDs, by the way. And so the way my brother had his movies stacked, they were the long way where you couldn't see the picture. So in order to pick a movie, you had to read the title. So pull out a movie. My brother says, his uncle says, nope, you have to read it if you want to pick it.
All right.
Well, he's there for 30 days. He can't pick a movie the whole time.
Wow.
And heartbroken he can't pick a movie. When he got back home, he was motivated like never before to learn how to read, just so next summer he could pick a movie without having to. So finding motivation for our kids is vital. What is it that motivates them? And if it's a sport, then let's use the sport. If it's a trade, let's use the trade. And those are the things, that's the challenge with our schools. Now, our schools are cookie cutter schools that try to program kids the same way today as we were doing 50 years ago. Right. We haven't moved our schools into the 21st century, and that's a problem. We got more technology now than ever. They've got more information in the palm of their hand. We've got to change how we do things because every kid learns differently. And every situation I've been in where we've used the things that kids are excited about to motivate them, they've thrived. And I've run this experiment with my kids, and my brother's run it with his kids, and his kids are in Patterson, and they went to Patterson Public Schools. And his oldest son, who's in college now, was an honor society graduate. Almost a 4.0. Is going to be going to medical school. He's pre-med now in college. All his kids carry at least a 3.5 GPA. All my kids here in this house carry a 3.5 GPA because we find things that motivate them, and then we hold them to a standard and a level of accountability. And we don't waver from that level of accountability, no matter what the excuse is, right? You've got a job to do. Do your job at your very best. All our kids play the violin. Now, I just wanted them to play an instrument. Once my oldest picked the violin, they all kind of fell in line. But I wanted them to be more well-rounded. And so I think it's important early on that we begin to establish some of these principles for our kids. And parents have to do better. We have to do better. Our kids should know how to read before they hit a school building. And so if we can, sort of reset what we're doing and how we're teaching kids, then I think we'll see, better returns, quite frankly. But we have to hold them to a high standard. If you hold a person to a high standard, especially at a young age, I've learned that they'll do everything in their power to get there, right? If we lower the bar, if we lower the standard, then there's no reason for them to reach high. Even here in Ohio, I've got a problem with what we do. In order to be academically eligible to play a sport in Ohio, you have to have a 1.75 GPA. Now, what are we telling our kids?
You don't have to. Right, you can barely make it.
We're telling them a D+ is good enough to play a sport, but it's not good enough for anything else. So on our football team, we don't play that nonsense. I got a minimum. You got to have a 3.0 GPA to play. So if you're a freshman in our program, I expect you to have a 3.0 every year. The upperclassmen that have been in the program before we got here, I know their cumulative is not going to be there, but each quarter, I expect them to have a minimum of a 3.0. We've created a player lounge that has televisions and snacks and refrigerator with drinks. I've got a PS5 coming for that room. If you want to get in this lounge, you got to have a 3.5, right? So we're intermingling, having a great football team, but also making sure that academically our kids understand that they've got a job to do and we expect them to hit a high standard. And as long as we do that, most of our kids are reaching it. So right now, I've got 2 kids on my football team that are currently in my high school that have below a 2.7 GPA. And, so we're pretty excited about that. And those 2 kids are working to get there because even though they have better than a 1.7, one of them will definitely play varsity for us next year unless he doesn't get his GPA over a 2.2. I told him right now, you're going to be on the team, you'll practice, you will not play on this football team with a 1.7 GPA. It won't happen.
Right. Right. So, and I think it's awesome coaches like yourself that set that standard. Because like you said, I'm sure it's all over the world. We have talented players and you don't have coaches that set in that standard. And then you're able to do it, like you said, just like your brother, able to do it in the home. And there's so many, I know the community I'm in here as well as, back home. There's many young men and young women that don't have that example in the house to hold that standard. Right. And so they don't have the same motivation to do the same. Yeah.
But see, I want to challenge that theory too, because listen, I get it, right? My mother was a baby when she got pregnant with my brother. She was 15 years old, and my father was 17. They were babies. And they made a lot of mistakes when we were kids. But they understood some things. So even though their life wasn't great and they were making mistakes, they were going to hold us to a standard. Right. And so even though, people are struggling in our communities, you still got to want better for your kids. And you still got to hold them to a standard. You don't have to make $1 million to read a book to your kid at night.
Right.
Or in the morning, whenever you get off work, or in the afternoon, right? You don't have to make $1 million to hold your children to a standard of behavior in the school building. Because that's what we had when we grew up, by the way, right? I mean, that standard has gotten more lax as time goes on, but there was always someone in our lives that held you accountable, whether it was your mother, your father, your grandmother, your uncle, right? Your older brother. And every kid needs somebody like that, no matter what their circumstances are. No matter what the adult is dealing with, they've got to know that somebody's got to hold the kid to a standard, and that's what we don't have. Our families have been deteriorating for decades, right? And kids are having babies younger and younger. We don't have the grandmother or the matriarch anymore that holds it down, or the patriarch, the grandfather. And so I get that the family dynamic is different, but we've got to figure out how to reestablish certain principles. So even as an adult, when I know I've made a lot of mistakes, because that was my father's deal with me and my brother. That was the deal he made with us. Look, I made a lot of mistakes, but I expect you guys to be better than me. Right. And I remember when I left the college, my father said, look, now you're leaving the college. And he said the same things to my brother. It is your responsibility to come back here better than me. Gotcha. And if you don't do that, then I failed you. Because that's the same thing his father told him. So even though my father was young and made some mistakes, he knew that he wanted better for his boys. And those are the things that we need more in our community. Because I can tell you, I'm not sure many people had a rougher background than my family. I mean, if I got that's a whole nother podcast, quite frankly. I have to get in to talk to some life into what we experienced as kids and what my family went through. And if we were able to do it, and we're not the only family from Paterson, New Jersey that overcame some extreme circumstances.
Right.
It can happen. It can be done on a large scale if we get serious about this.
Correct. And I'm always having an opportunity to speak to kids in various programs, even locally here. One of my favorite quotes, I probably utilize it like every time I go out to speak, because I run into the young person who doesn't have hope because of their situation in their home. But I love the Stephen Covey quote that says, "You're not a product of your circumstances, but you're a product of your decisions." Yeah. And so I have every group of kids I speak to, and I tell them no matter what their situation is, I believe that they still have hope and they can make it. And so I have them repeat that quote because so many of our young kids, they believe they are what they're around. And so if we can continue, whether it's coaches or mentors or teachers, continue to influence our kid or encourage our kids to have hope even beyond what they see every day when they wake up, I think that will make a big difference. Because like you said, your family had to overcome some things. And there's many other people that have gone on to do awesome things in life that had to overcome some things. But there's so many of our young kids that believe I have to be what I wake up to every morning.
Right. Well, and that's not true, right? And that's where, we as adults have to be a little more responsible in what our kids are listening to, what they hear every day. It's bad enough when you live in a community where you see it, but then you turn on music. And as adults, we don't do a great job of that. Just a quick story. Our program was hosting here in Ohio a cheer competition. It was a regional cheer competition. There was probably 5,000 people in the building, mostly young girls. And at the time where they were deliberating to find out who was the best cheer team, they had a DJ in the building. And the DJ starts to play Sexy Red. Wow. And it was the first hit song. And it was the uncut version.
Wow.
And within the first 15 seconds, she hits the popular line, and I'm not going to repeat.
Wow.
And I absolutely lost it. I lost it. They're in my building. I see all these beautiful young ladies singing one of the most, probably the worst song in the history of America in a lot of ways, right? And I run over to the director and the DJ, and I was like, "What are we doing?" I said, "We're not going to have a program in this building playing music like that." Right. Because and the thing that probably grieved me more was that every little girl in that building from 5 years old to 17 years old knew every lyric. And so in a lot of ways, the system is setting up our young people, and we're complicit. We're complicit in that because we allow that nonsense. And I remember a long time ago, there's two lessons that my mother taught me. She said, just because we're in the hood don't mean we have to live in it.
Right.
So just because our house is in this neighborhood doesn't mean it has to look like every other house. So go cut the grass and make sure there's no garbage out there, right? And that's a lesson that just carried me a lifetime. You can always separate yourself from the conditions that you're in. You can do some things that are different that everybody else does. And then she always said, you have to protect yourself. And I remember saying, "It's just music." It's just music. And she says, no, it's never just music. She says,
Right.
you have to understand what the devil's purpose was, and
Correct.
how he influences you through that, through your eye gate and your ear gate now. So you have to protect that, especially at a young age. Now, yeah, at some point you get older and you understand that it's all nonsense, like at our age. But when you're young, they don't really get that, and we see that, really working itself out today. I remember once upon a time they were saying, all music and movies do is mimic real life. Well, now I think in a lot of ways it's opposite.
It
The
is. It is.
are influencing real life, and our young people are doing things that they've never done before. So, when my son went off to college, when he was leaving to go to college, he and I had a conversation. I said, listen, I'm going to be really real with you. When I was in college, every girl that came there, they knew one of their jobs was to keep you out of their pants,
Right.
because that's how they were raised.
Right.
That's totally different now. Now they're trying to get in your pants, and they're probably going to invite their roommate.
Correct. Correct.
You have to understand where you are and what you're trying to accomplish there, and try not to be too distracted, because those distractions can derail your purpose, or at least make your road a little longer. And so as a community, we got to do better. I mean, there have been people in society, rappers, and they've been telling us this for a long time. We've got to figure this out. We grew up in an era of rap music that was a lot different, where we had conscious rappers.
Yes.
That there was a message behind their methodology, right? Or their madness. The KRS-One,
Yes.
always jumps to the front of the page for me. But there was a lot more than that. Now, man, it's just junk for the most part.
Yes. Yes.
Okay?
Very true.
It's just junk unless you got Bizzle, unless you get a Christian rapper. I mean, it is.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and so many people don't know about the Bizzles of the world, because Bizzle is an awesome, talented, whether it's lyrically, but just his message is always strong. So it's I wish more young people knew of the Bizzles.
Well, they think,
Man,
it has to be introduced to them, but at the same time, we can't just say it's music anymore.
Right, it's not.
Real conversations with our kids so they understand what they're listening to. Because I don't tell my kids they can't listen to it. But I want to let them, I have a conversation with them to make sure they understand what they're listening to and how destructive it can be if you allow this to influence your decisions.
Right, that's good. So I want to ask you a couple questions just about the state of football in a couple different areas. When it comes to, we had Penfield back in the day, but we have Pop Warner, which is one of the big outlets. What is your view on just the level of football and the things that are done on the Pop Warner level across the board?
Well, football has taken a hit over the last 10 years, just because of the narrative around CTE and concussions. And so one thing is you don't have as many kids playing it anymore. So the numbers are down across the country. And a lot of the things that they're saying is true, but some of it isn't true. Like, the reality is soccer has a higher rate of concussion, but people are still going to flock to play that. So the big deal is at the youth level is, so one of the things we try to do here at the high school level, because I started coaching at the youth level with my kids, is we bring our coaches in here and we have clinics with them talking about tackling, so that they understand the importance of tackling properly. We use hawk tackling here at our high school, right? We keep the head out of it entirely. And then just talking about the importance of, if a kid does get smacked, that, you can't just put him back in the game anymore. You have to make sure that he does not have a concussion or is not cloudy, because that's what exasperates CTE. Because at the end of the day, you can't totally stop it, right? The brain is putting in your head. There's no helmet that's ever going to stop it. But what we can do is we can mitigate the risk by just being smart. Back in our days, so you got your bell rung, you're right, just get back in there. Well, those that they shouldn't have done. So just understanding the importance of proper practice, tackling techniques, I think will help, regrow the game. But after that, I think, kids are bigger, stronger, faster. Kids in high school are not like college kids. I don't know about you, but we didn't lift a lot of weights at Patterson Catholic, right?
Right.
And now we lift weights all the time at my high school. I mean, we're 5 days a week right now in the weight room. So if we're not lifting weights, we're doing speed and conditioning training. We do a lot of speed work because it kills. And it's things that I wasn't doing until I got to Ohio State that we're doing at our high school now. Kids are bigger. I've got 2 linemen that are 6'5". One is 265. The other one is 285. These are big. They're both tackles. One of them just got his first offer to Akron. He was going into his junior year. The other one will be a senior. He's committed to Louisville. The offense we run, we run a wide open spread. We actually we sprinkle in some triple option out of the gun, but my middle son is our quarterback, and we run a spread. He ran for 900 yards and threw for 2,200 last year.
Wow,
I expect 3,000 yards and run for 1,000 this year. So we spread the ball around. We are the concepts that we run are college concepts. So when he goes to college, he's not going to have to learn a whole new offense, a whole new system. I remember when I got to Ohio State, it was like learning Chinese, quite frankly. I never watched film in high school. I don't know about you, but we didn't watch any film. Every now and then, Coach Lou would pop on the tape, and we watched maybe 2 minutes, and that was it.
Right.
We watch film every Saturday morning at the very least, but our coaches watch film every day with our kids.
Right.
Know how to break down tape. They know what to look for. I just left the school today, and my son was having a session with our offensive coordinator just about coverages. Where the weaknesses. I didn't know any of that stuff when I got to college. So our high school kids are a lot more sophisticated. They're bigger, stronger, faster. The game play is a lot better than it was when we were growing up. I'm not sure it's always tougher, but it's definitely better. And so in that regard, the game is better. Now, the other things that are changing, I've got mixed emotions on, quite frankly. When I got to Ohio State, John Cooper was the first $1 million coach Ohio State ever had. That was our athletic director was making $250,000. You fast forward today, where Ryan Day's making $10 million a year. The athletic director is making $3 million a year, right? And so for all this time, the only people that were getting the same exact thing from 1955 to, just 3 years ago was the player. Right? A scholarship and 3 meals.
All right.
So the changes, I think, are good changes, but I'm not sure they're implementing them right. And we see that trickling down to the high school level. Honestly, I call it the LeBron James effect. And I like LeBron. I think he's the greatest basketball player to ever play. I mean, it just shows up in the stats. But the one thing that I'm not fond about is how often he moved around. Yeah. And then that, you saw that in AAU basketball, but now you see it in high school. I think you should leave a high school if the system doesn't fit you, right? Or you're in the same class with a high school All-American. Why would you stay? Right. You should leave. But we got kids leaving for all sorts of reasons. We got kids in college that are starting in great programs and are leaving to go start somewhere else. Would you ever imagine a freshman All-American safety leaving Alabama and going to Ohio State?
Right. Right.
But that bag makes the difference.
Right.
So yeah, I think they need to make some changes. I think there should be some parameters around transferring. Right now, there are no rules. I think there should be an academic component to it. I also think that the NC2A should ban collectives, because right now, basically, kids are getting paid by the school through collectives. That's not what the NIL was supposed to be, name, image, and likeness. And we see that trickling down to high school. So we see more and more kids transferring constantly in high school now. We see some states have allowed NILs to be used. Texas was one of the first, because when they lost Quinn Ewers, when he left as a junior to go play football at Ohio State, that was a problem for them. And so in some regards, it is sort of like the wild, wild west with the gold rush. We've got to figure out some of these things. The unintended consequences, I think, are hurting kids. Not so much at the high school level, but right now at the college level, almost 60% of kids in the transfer portal have nowhere to go. Right. So they're not helping themselves by jumping in that portal. So yeah, I mean, I think the state, in some ways, it's in good position. In other ways, we need to figure some things out. But, sports is always in flux. I think as long as everybody has good intentions, which that hasn't always been the case, then we can figure it out.
Right. So as we're getting closer to wrapping it up, I definitely want to touch on we so much great information you've offered. But I want to touch, because I think you're a great example in yourself, that I'm always trying to just bring to our young guests, that there is life outside of playing the game. You were able to go on and play Canadian ball. You actually went on, I believe you played, didn't you play some indoor ball, and then you even made some business moves after that when it came to indoor football, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, so my journey, just to go back through, after playing at Ohio State, I was signed as a free agent with the Seattle Seahawks. Had a coffee break in the NFL. I probably could have extended that some. Once I was done there, the Arizona Cardinals wanted to sign me, but they want to move me to free safety. And I remember saying to my agent, so just so I understand this, they want me to tackle Jerome Bettis, and I'll go up to Canada. So I played 7 years in Canada, and then I just tried to figure some things out. I came back and played local arena football. It wasn't the top level. It was like Arena 2, but I had some ownership in the team. So that was my first entrepreneurship. So in order for them to sign me, they had to give me 10% of the team. Unfortunately, that was right on the cusp of Lehman Brothers failing, and the economy shortly followed. So there wasn't a lot of extra cash floating around in people's pockets. So the league folded and the team folded. But from there, I met a banker who became a good friend. I started learning about the banking industry. And 10 years ago, me and two partners raised $6.5 million to buy a local community bank. Time that bank was 26 million in total assets. Today it's 480 million in total assets. Now it doesn't mean 180 million in my pocket. That means that's what the bank is worth. And so it's been a great journey of learning about banking, how finance works, how your credit score impacts you, how you can build wealth through buying property. All those things have been excellent for me. And at the same time, having some ownership in that business. And then I've got a few other businesses. I got a company called Spender that's actually in the legal marijuana space that, is probably on the cusp of being a really big opportunity for us. And so just trying to find other lines of income, quite frankly, right? But the thing that I learned is that football is a platform.
Right.
And that's what our kids have to understand. You can't do it for the rest of your life. It's impossible. Father Time is undefeated. And most of us are pushed out way before we ever want to. And I don't want anybody to be offended by this, but with my kids and with the kids that I coach, I explain it to them as like a relationship, like a beautiful girl that never ages, right? She's found the fountain of youth. You don't. At some point, I don't care how good you've been to her, she's going to be done with you because she's living forever. And she's going to the next best thing, that next good quarterback, that next good running back. And you got to figure it out. So in the meantime, make sure that you are getting out of this game what you need to, because it becomes a great networking opportunity to meet people and learn about things and set yourself up for a bright future. If you're a part of the lucky few, the 2% that gets to play college football at any level, from Division I all the way down to NAIA, make sure you understand what you're doing. Network on the campus that you're in. A lot of times as football players, we stay away from all the smart kids we call nerds, right? No, I want you to migrate towards them.
Right.
Because they look up to you because you play football. You make friends with them because those are the guys who are going to start businesses. That's where you can go and raise capital from. That's the guy you can talk to about starting your own business. That's a family that might have some wherewithal to help you start a business. There's a kid here that was a walk-on at Ohio State that went to a really, really good private school in high school. Once his playing days were done at Ohio State, he went and raised $10 million to start a hedge fund, right? Because he understood the networking aspect. So it's not just about football. Don't let that be your only focus, because you have to do something. Even if you play 15 years. I've got teammates that play 15 years. Sean Springs owns a technology company. It's an impact technology company that they're working on helmet technology to prevent concussions. He was the third pick of the draft in 1996, and now he's working in the private industry. Eddie George, coach, at where is he at? At Tennessee State, the HBCU. He's a football coach. Orlando Pace owns a business. It goes on. Look at guys that play in the NFL. I always thought back John Elway. Before John Elway became a GM, he owned car dealerships and sold those car dealerships for $100 million, right? So you have to set yourself up to be poised to do something after the sport you play. Tim Thomas is not just sitting on his hands in Paterson, New Jersey.
Right.
He owns property. He's in a lot of other businesses because his playing days were over a long time ago. LeBron James is now going on like year 21, but he came straight out of high school. And he's about to be 40 years old. This is about to be done for him. If he plays another 3 years, he's 43. He's got to do something else. Now, that's probably a poor example because he's almost a billionaire. But even do something else, like Michael Jordan is a business guy. Magic Johnson is a business guy. They just don't sit on their hands. So we've got to put ourselves in position to transition easily. Football is a tough sport because every person I know that has played the game they experience a little bit of depression when it's over because there's no place to replicate football. If you're a basketball player, you can play, rec league basketball, church league until you're 60.
Right.
Same thing with baseball. You can play, but football, you're not going out and tackling each other, on a Saturday night and then go to work on Monday. So we all experience a little bit of depression when we're done. We can shorten that window if we have a life plan ready to go once we're done.
That's good. Good. Great information that you offer. I just believe it's information that our kids need to be getting more often. So many kids don't get the information that your athletes are able to get from yourself, and the other coaches that's on your staff. I think it's awesome because our kids need to know that there is life, whether, like you said, whether you get to play on the next level after high school or whether you even go to the pros, there will eventually be an ending to your career, and you need to know what's next. And you definitely exemplified that with all the business opportunities you've been able to make. You've also gone on. I know you've been a color analyst, and working, sports from that end. And then now you're coaching. What has that, as we get to the closing, what has that experience been like? You've touched on it in so many different areas, but what has that been like now being able to give this information to young men coming up?
Oh, it's been great. I mean, it's been it really has been an opportunity of a lifetime. Like you said, I work for the Big Ten Network for 10 years and broadcasting and all that stuff is fun. But there's nothing like pouring into young people. And they don't always agree with you. And some parents don't always agree. I've got a hard line. We've got a fascinating approach. We're old school.
Right.
We hold them accountable. And they don't always like that. But the proof is in the pudding. I've seen it work over and over again. It worked with me and my brother. It's worked with my kids. So we kind of stay right there. But coaching is fantastic. A lot of times I kick myself for not getting into it sooner. But I'm thrilled to have this opportunity, like you said, just to pour back into young people the lessons that I've learned from great people that I've been around, starting with my father, being with my brother, playing for Coach Lou, playing for John Cooper at Ohio State. You learn different lessons from each one of them that help build the man that you are, and having opportunity to pour that into young people is fantastic.
That's great. That's great. So we always close with these last two questions. Again, Coach Jackson, I appreciate the information that you've offered that I believe will definitely be a blessing to that young athlete, maybe to even encourage some coaches or some mentors to pour some of the things and ideas that you're able to pour into your kids. Hopefully they'll be able to take this information and pour it into the young people who lies therein. But I want to ask you, to the young athlete listening, why is it important to have positive people in your circle?
Oh, that's a great question. I love that question. And I share this with my team all the time. I've never seen an eagle fly with a duck. Ducks can't get that high. And so another thing I've heard, that if you show me your 5 best friends, I'll show you your future.
Wow.
The people you hang with are going to influence you the most. And if you're hanging with people that have bad intentions, you're going to end up in bad intentions. No matter how long you've held out, eventually you're going to end up the same place they are. It's the old adage when we grew up in Patterson, right? If somebody steals a car and you're getting it and the cops catch you, you're both going to jail, whether you stole it. Right. So, fly with eagles. Don't fly with ducks. And if you do that, good things will happen to you. If you surround yourself with people who have ambition and want to do something in life, it will rub off on you. And opportunities will find you. It's hard to find opportunities when people who are on the same level that you are, quite frankly, right? You got to find for somebody that's done it in the field that you want to do it in, and glean from them everything that you absolutely can, and then find a social circle that is as motivated as you are to do something special. And if you do that, then you will find yourself in a position that you want to be. But if you surround yourself with people who aren't motivated, and because for whatever reason you do that, then they're not going to motivate you or encourage you to be better either. Wow. And so, your people make you who you are, quite frankly. And so, be an eagle, fly with eagles. Don't stay away from ducks. They're in dirty ponds. You want to be out on top of the mountains, flying and soaring all over.
That's great. That's great. And our final question, who or what is it that inspires you most in life?
Oh man, that's a hard question because I've had a lot of people that inspired me from obviously my mother, my father, overcoming the things that they did to raise my brother and I. My brother's been a big inspiration. He's a city council member in Patterson now, fighting every day for the people back home. Um, my wife inspires me daily, right? Watching the things that she does. My kids inspire me, seeing them achieve their goals. So yeah, I try to find inspiration from a lot of people. Then I try to find somebody, out um, in the private sector to inspire me to even be better and do better. Um, so yeah, for me, it's not one particular person. I think there's different areas where I find inspiration in a lot of people. But then at the end of the day, I still want to hit some goals, right? So I think about my goals, and hopefully they will help give me some inspiration to continue to be better. Because sometimes it's easy to feel sorry for yourself, right? Or easy to feel like you've arrived and you've accomplished enough. But I'm not sure that's what God put us on the planet for. He's put us here to continue to get better and be an example for other people, the shining light, so to speak, right? And then at the end of the day, my life is anchored in Jesus Christ. And so, making sure that he's always the head of our household allows me to get over mistakes that I've made easier.
That's good. That's good. That's good. Always a blessing to have awesome guests like yourself on the show. I think it just brings many of our young kids don't always get to hear, but just someone, again, I always love to talk about life. I love to talk about, being great in the sport that they're playing. But for me, it's always definitely a blessing when I have a guest that's also speaking about the best foundation you can have and having a personal relationship with Jesus. And just in your faith, there's something I say to some young kids when I go to speak, and I talk about a few different aspects that they need. But I always tell them the biggest thing you need is a solid foundation. I let them know right away, my foundation is my faith in God. And
Yep.
so I can't speak to you about any other foundation because I have one foundation that has me where I am today and has blessed me to be able to get over not only things, whether it was back home in Jersey, but even since I've become an adult, I've had to overcome some adversity. And so because of my foundation, I'm able to do so. So I thank you for the information. I thank you for your time and being a blessing again to this show. And you all know, I say it every show, it is good to be great in the sport that you're playing, but it's even better to be great in life. So again, thank you, Coach Jackson, for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate the time. It was fun.
Yes, yes. And so I encourage you all to take this information, not only apply it to your life, but if you're a coach, if you're an athlete, like spread this information because we want to see our athletes go on to not just be great in that sport, but to be great as husbands, as wives, as parents. We want to see them to see them thrive in life as a whole. So I challenge you, continue to take this information, apply it and share it. And thank you for joining us. We'll see you next episode. Continue to join us as we go out and up. Have a great one.